Samata, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to talk to you. So just to set the scene, you've got myself, Diolu, and my business partner, Chanel. We are co-founders of I Am History. I Am History is an online lifestyle magazine that is dedicated to celebrating Black history, culture, people, Black stories and voices. I'm going to hand over to Chanel, who's going to do an intro for us.
Fantastic.
As Diolu said, we are super excited to be interviewing you. We came across your Instagram a couple of years ago and just thought, this is amazing. You're amazing. We love the work that you're doing to drive sustainable fashion and moving the conversation forward as well. And especially being a Black woman in that space, dealing with high fashion. We just thought, what you're doing is really amazing. And we had you bookmarked on our list to interview you. This was even before we changed our format to doing interviews and editorials. You were always on our list to eventually speak to and just hear your story. So
nice.
Really happy, to be doing this.
What a nice thing to say. Thank you so much.
Oh, no.
I wasn't expecting that. So just trying to hold it down, But thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. So can you tell us, Samata, a bit about yourself and your journey into sustainable fashion?
Absolutely. Well, so my name's Samata and I'm a British-born Ghanaian. So I was born and raised in Cambridge in the United Kingdom. And I'm basically someone that's always been passionate about creativity, even though I have never studied any creative degree at any stage of my life. I did biology, chemistry, maths and physics for my A-levels. I studied economics, finance and management for my degree, but I've always just been drawn to creativity in the fashion industry. And so when I moved to London to kind of pursue my degree, I basically used that as an opportunity to just immerse myself in the fashion industry and to really get around creative people, designers, editors, garment, textile engineers, all of it. And so I've always just loved creativity. And a while ago, before I ended up where I am, I had my own clothing label as well. And it was a self-funded thing that I did where I was working, and when I got paid, I would then kind of redirect the money that I made into my label. And it was just this journey for me of trying to kind of support myself as a designer. So I've just always worked in fashion. Even when I haven't worked in fashion, I've always been passionate about understanding the creative side of things and the business side of things. But I did take a pause after a while because I just found it too overwhelming. And after the end of that year, that's kind of when I entered Red Carpet Green Dress as a designer and started this new sustainable fashion journey. But creativity is something in my life. My parents are very much into sustainability and the environment. They both work in conservation and social justice in different ways. So I think it's inevitable that I would have ended up working where I am right now, even if I didn't kind of see it coming.
Oh, that's really lovely, actually, especially hearing that your parents sort of had that background as well. What was I know you had, as you said, you studied something completely different and you wanted that creative outlet. What was it that got you into sustainability in the first place?
I think I literally tripped into it because I used to design red carpet dresses. So my background is I kind of taught myself how to design, how to make, etc. And I was always drawn to the red carpet style of fashion. I loved glamorous pieces and I loved designing pieces that really accentuated celebrated different body shapes as well. That was always a big thing for me when I was designing. And so when, after taking a break, I entered Red Carpet Green Dress, I didn't really pay attention to the sustainability part of that. All I saw was, can you design a dress for the red carpet? And I didn't really unpack the bit where it said with a sustainable twist. And it was only after I kind of went to the entry page and I started to read about the criteria, I read that I needed to find organic materials and certified materials. So it was an accident. I would always have entered that contest because I'm the kind of person that will try and learn things. Even if I don't know everything, I'll try and learn it. And that's how I kind of viewed the sustainable element of the question. So I entered it and I started to research fabrics and I found fabrics. Then I bought a few books and I literally I feel like it was this can of worms. Once I opened it, I literally could not go back to not knowing about sustainability. I felt like, whoa, there's this whole other space of this industry where I didn't even know it existed, but it just resonates with me so much more than the area that I've been working in. So I always say it was a total accident, but I'm so glad that it happened. because I just think that the sustainable fashion space is, to me, one of the most fulfilling spaces to work in, 100%.
Wow. Okay. That's great to hear that you've been able to fulfill that side of you. Can you explain what sustainable fashion is, just for those who might not know exactly?
I think for me, sustainable fashion it's almost a conversation. It's questions and answers. And that in itself is something that when I started in it, I thought it was so specific. I literally thought it's the materials I use, the way that I treat those materials and the product that I'm making. And it was really with the journey that I've been taking with Red Carpet Green Dress, which has been a journey of like 9 years or something now, that I've realized how like all encompassing it is. So the best way for me to describe sustainability is a bit kind of theoretical, really, because I describe it as this kind of pebble causing a ripple. And the pebble to me represents the thing that we're making. So if it's a dress, a jacket, even if it's an experience, a sustainable holiday experience, or if it's a process, a sustainable dye process, it's questioning how that thing comes to be. So it's the materials, the dyes, the processes, how you're creating waste, how you're avoiding creating waste, how that thing is going to be packaged, how it's going to move around, how it's going to arrive. But then that was where my kind of definition of sustainability ended in the beginning. Like, this is how we're making this thing and it has to be sustainable. But then I realized that it's kind of the ripple that pebble causes, which is all about who's involved in making that, how many hands are touching this process, are they being treated fairly, are they being paid fairly, where are they working, are they representative of like society, etc., etc. So then it became about the hands involved in the process, the experience, the product, etc. And then it kind of spread out even more to who are we making this for, and it became about the messages that we communicate when we're talking about sustainability. So who are like our ambassadors, who are our tastemakers that we're selecting to promote this experience, what communities are we involving in this product, and which communities are we excluding. So I can't give like a succinct and tiny definition of sustainability, because to me it's a conversation. It's not a final kind of consumerist act or consumer product. It's literally a process, and it's constantly asking yourself the questions about who this is impacting: planet, people, community, animals, air, soil, earth, BIPOC, and just making sure that as much as possible you're doing as good as you can in all of those answers. So I know that's not a short answer, but it's the best I can do with that question.
No, that's fine, actually. It's quite interesting because you mentioned so many elements of, you know, the process within fashion. So how much control do you have within that to make sure that, you know, you are working within a sustainable environment with so many moving wheels? Like, how much control do you actually have in that?
You have to start with the lens of who you are, what you're doing, and where you are, right? So me as a designer, when I was designing, which I'm not anymore, the control that I exerted was about where I went to source my fabrics, and within the budget that I had, what was the best that I could afford to buy? What were the questions that I was willing to ask all of those people that I was interacting with, my textile suppliers, asking them, where did this come from? Do you have any certificates from it? Do you have any proof that this was made in safe working conditions, that it's Ecotech, has it got an Ecotech certification? Is it a LEED certified building? What can you tell me about these inputs that I'm sourcing? And sometimes you can get lots of information, and sometimes you can't get any information. But for me, when I was a small designer, I was really conscious about trying to find the best solutions I could. So if it was going to source my materials locally, I would always travel to Southall, which is an area where I would go and get the best silks and stuff, but it's from a predominantly Asian community, Bangladeshi community, Indian community. And I loved talking to them about the materials that they were sourcing and how long they'd worked with the mills that they were working with back in Bangladesh or in India. And I found that so much better for me than maybe going to the West End and getting these materials but not having that story with the fabrics. Or even when I was sourcing like my trims and details and stuff like that, I would go from like the vintage stores like around Portobello and get like recycled details like that. So when I was designing, the things I could control, I did my best with. And it meant sometimes making compromises whereby I'm not going to spend crazy amounts like printing flyers and doing physical prints. I'd rather redirect that money towards the quality of the inputs that I'm putting into my label. But then if I look at it from the perspective of a designer that maybe can't command massive quantities, then you are sometimes in a position where there's only certain things you can control. You might be able to get like maybe the certified material, but you won't get the answers on the dies, but at least you're asking the questions and you're trying to engage with the suppliers to know this is important to me and this is a good area for you to look at. And then I think about it from the perspective of being with Red Carpet Green Dress, and what we have influence over is almost on a not a higher level, but yes, we're working with designers and brands, and we can talk to them about their textiles, their dyes, their wet processes, their dry processes, how they can decarbonize their supply chains, all of that stuff. But we can also talk to them about how they're representing communities, the tastemakers that they're choosing to share their messages of sustainability. We can encourage them to decenter themselves and Europe or the Western world from this conversation about sustainability as if they're the leaders when there are other parts of the world that do it. So I just think, depending on where you work and what you do, it's the questions that you ask, and I think it's the choices and the compromises that you make, and it's recognizing that you're never going to be able to please everyone, but just do the best that you can in any given situation, always. And, you know, there will be a shortfall, but I think for me, sustainability is a pursuit versus an end place that you reach, because I don't necessarily know if you can ever get to this place where you're 100% sustainable.
I really like that. That's quite quotable, actually, sustainability being a pursuit. Yeah. I really like that. How would you describe the difference between slow fashion and fast fashion, and how does that connect to sustainable fashion?
This is a good question. So if I start thinking about slow fashion, I personally feel like slow fashion was almost an antidote and a reaction to the prevalence of fast fashion. So slow fashion to me represents the process and the resources, and it's not just literally slowing down that. So if we look at the current situation where we're like, some brands are making 52 collections a year, and just the speed of the expectation of delivery is insane. I spoke to a friend who used to work in manufacturing, and she said that she visited a factory where the garment artisans or the workers there were given a timer, and they had 120 seconds from cut to delivery of jacket at the end of the cycle, and there was a timer going, and they were rewarded for hitting this time frame. And if you just think about the stress and pressure that puts on not just the people working, but just their physical bodies, just to be working at that rate, it's unsustainable. And I think the other part of slow fashion, it's challenging that need to get things immediately. It's challenging that need to get new things the second something is decided to be on trend. And I think it's encouraging people to focus on better quality, on focus on more seasonless, timeless pieces or timeless processes that don't put people at risk and don't put people's health at risk, and don't create like very unrealistic, I want it this minute expectations. So for me, slow fashion is kind of a soothing response to the pressure of fast fashion, which is very consumerist. It's very much led by the idea that we're not enough as we are, that we don't have enough right now, and that we always need something else. And so even on a kind of more holistic level, I feel like slow fashion is trying to encourage us to not just appreciate the things that we have, but appreciate ourselves more and appreciate that we're adequate already. But like on a more kind of technical kind of side of things, I think slow fashion to me represents this kind of breaking away from the linear model of fashion production, which we all know is like take, make, waste. And we know that like our clothing production has doubled in the past 15 years. We know that clothing production and consumption is not slowing down. We're scheduled to make like 62% more waste, use 50% more water in the next 15 years. So slow fashion is kind of, to me, a soft alarm bell that's ringing. And some people might say it's a really loud alarm bell that's ringing. And it's just basically saying we need to relax. We need to slow down how we're making things, how we see the need for things, because the way that we're doing things is unsustainable. And I almost don't think slow fashion's the right. It works because it's the antithesis of fast fashion. But I almost just think slow fashion to me is healthier fashion. It's a healthier fashion system, you know, for people, for planet, and for all of it.
I kind of think that with COVID, and you know, happening, there's been like this reset. Do you think that will also sort of benefit the drive for slow fashion? Have you seen a change since COVID-19 hit?
I feel mixed about that, because on one hand, I feel like we saw, I think, the worst of human nature when COVID hit, as well as the best. And specifically in the fashion industry, I'm talking about brands literally abandoning the manufacturers that have worked for them and worked with them for 10, 15, 20 years, and just refusing to pay for orders, refusing to pay furlough, refusing to pay for materials. And I think that created like not just an accumulation, but like the highest level of relationship breaking and stress across the industry. And I think when you couple that with what slow fashion represents a change in direction, a kind of taking a route detour from this model that we're on right now and going this way, and kind of trying to bring us back down to humanity and valuing the things that people made. And I don't feel like what happened when COVID first hit really reflects that anyone was valuing anything that people were doing. There was no value for relationships. There was no value for work. There was no value for labor. There was no value for garments. Some of these things have been burnt, you know. So on one hand, I felt like this is so demoralizing that this has happened. But on the other hand, the conversations that are taking place right now within the industry about how broken the model is and how desperately we need a new model. And now we're talking about legislation, and now we're talking about metrics and accountability and KPIs. Now it feels like the pressure alone from this could be what it takes for people to recognize this isn't going to work. And the other reason I think potentially this has made a difference is for those manufacturers who were abandoned, or for those workers across the world, not just specifically in Bangladesh, but across the manufacturing industry, including in Rwanda, including in Kenya, including in Egypt, wherever. They've had a shift in how they plan to form relationships going forward. I'm speaking to a few factory owners right now and manufacturers who are signing completely different types of contracts now going forward about expectations for delivery times, expectations for quantities, like safeguards for if things go wrong. So it's forced them to kind of change the way that they're interacting with the brands that they've been providing. And I think that pushback could give us space for a slower fashion model.
That's amazing. Sometimes you have to like go so low in order to it's a shame, but that's how it is sometimes. It's
such a shame that it came to that, but I'm so glad that they're kind of not that the manufacturers and also garment workers, like that talk about unionization, these things are just now they're saying we don't want the kind of relationship we had with you before. We're not giving you kind of, and I think that's so good, and I'm so happy about that.
That's really that is really sort of triumphant, actually. And how much of an impact would you say that fashion has on the environment, like in terms of statistics?
It's a good question, and I think I always say that people don't always connect fashion and the environment in the sense that fashion comes from the environment. You know, I always say fashion comes from farms and fields and forests, and it pours into lakes and rivers, and it takes from the air and it gives back to the air. So fashion is like intrinsically, you know, leather is animal skin, you know, cotton is grown in fields, and, you know, and all of these things. So the impact that I always look at, I look at it across different kind of metrics or ways to kind of measure its impact. I look at like fashion's impact on the climate. So we know that fashion has a huge impact on the climate. Now that the jury's out, it's said to contribute between 6 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And that's a massive amount. And the reason that it does, like the reason that is kind of where it is because we know the fashion value cycle is so long, from like the raw material extraction, you know, across to the wet processing of textiles, across to the cutting, making and trimming, the machines that are being used, whether a factory is using coal or if it's using a kind of more renewable energy source, across to packaging. All of these things are like responsible for greenhouse gas emissions. So we've got a big impact there as well. We have a huge impact on the waterways. And we know that's really through textiles, through the treatment of textiles, so dyeing them, but also like when you buy a garment and it says it's like wrinkle free, right, or like flame retardant, and it's like, well, that's because it's been treated with chemicals to be able to have those properties, and there's a highly intensive water process there. And we know that even kind of farming cotton, huge water consumption, but with water pollution in particular, it's like some 20% of water pollution is literally from textile treatment and textile production. I think that's huge. And the thing that's kind of most upsetting to me about that is, yes, it's impacting the environment. It's also impacting the communities that live in those areas, like in Indonesia, in China, wherever you're looking. This is really kind of sickening. We have impact on soil and agriculture and waterways as well through the microplastics, the microfiber problem, where polyesters or synthetics, when they wash and shed, you've got the microfibers running into the waterways, and that's choking the rivers. It's ending up in animals, it's ending up in placentas of newborn babies. It's just insane. Like, it's actually just insane. And then even when you think about when we throw away garments and stuff and they go to the landfill, you know, they ultimately, the ones that can break down or can biodegrade, they're still kind of dyed with chemicals that will soak into the soil, go into that kind of the water, and so that still becomes part of nature as well. So it's toxic in that way. So to me, fashion's impact on the environment is just huge. And if we don't kind of divert away from this reliance on not just synthetics, but such a huge scale, like 98 million tons a year of non-renewable resources to make synthetics like polyesters and stuff, I get very panicked about the scale of the impact. And I think it's something that affects everybody that works in this space. When you really look at the figures, you just think we need lots of different people doing lots of different things to help us get to this end destination. I don't think we can rely on one movement, you know, like people like, oh, the vegan movement or the recycling movement. I personally don't feel like one movement is going to kind of save us. I feel like a concerted effort across all of these different areas, you know, that could be the ticket.
Hearing those numbers it's very, very scary, actually.
It really is. And the thing is, it's more and more stuff is now being kind of recorded. Now people are recording like fashion's impact on like even the animal agriculture link from leathers and stuff. And that's why this kind of conversation about vegan alternatives is kind of quite important, because animal agriculture in itself has a huge impact on greenhouse gases, etc. So anywhere you look, anything you like about nature, fashion has a relationship with it. Trees, that's viscose. So if we're not sustainably managing how we forest, how we kind of take those trees, and there are ways to sustainably manage things like what Tencel does, but if we aren't sustainably managing it, then, you know, it is worrying.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be interesting to hear your personal perspective. So I think when we look at sustainability and the voices that we hear from, it predominantly tends to be from a white voice and white perspective. And as a key leader within this space and being a Black woman, can you talk us through how you're demystifying the notion that it's predominantly a white conversation?
Yeah, that is something I struggle with it a lot, because I find myself feeling really frustrated about the fact that that is literally what it looks like. And I have to battle that idea, and I constantly have to battle that notion that this part of the world or this demographic is teaching everyone else about sustainability, and it's exhausting. And I think that any woman or any person that like represents a group that's often underrepresented, you feel this immense amount of pressure to kind of represent yourself well, represent your community well. And that is, I think, the sickening side of what this kind of predominantly anything space creates. And it's frustrating. And so I try and kind of tackle it in specific ways. So with the work that I do, for example, because I feel that I am responsible for what I do, I am also responsible for like the partners or the brands we collaborate with, to the extent that I'm communicating with them what's important to me or what they should be aware of, or expressing my disappointment or encouragement for the things that they're doing. But when it comes to me specifically, I'm someone who's really passionate about kind of education and curriculum. I used to do guest kind of speaking spots at colleges like London College of Fashion, Central, St. Martin's. I've done some stuff with Esmod, Berkeley, FIT. And I think that I push for kind of representation in curriculum, first of all, because I think when we start our journey in any industry or in any space, we start with our institutions that teach us. We start with our lecturers, we start with our teachers, etc. And I think that if there isn't that representation, not just by who's teaching us, but in the curriculum, what are we covering when we talk about this topic of sustainability? Are we educating students and people about the sustainable dye practices that have been pioneered in Japan? Are we teaching them about the ethnic and the strong cultural sustainable textiles that have been provided in parts of West Africa like Nigeria and Ghana? Or are we only focusing on the sustainability that they might come across in Europe? And if you consider how international the fashion industry is and how international design colleges around the world are, I like to push for representation in curriculum. So what we're talking about, I like to push for representation with regards to the speakers. So when I used to go into colleges, I would always get like 1 or 2 Black students coming up to me afterwards and saying, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad that there's someone that kind of looks like me that's having this conversation as well. Because I think there's something comforting about seeing somebody that looks like you in a space talking about things that they're passionate about. It's comforting, and it shouldn't be such an isolating experience for not Black people, yes, but also just BIPOC community in the whole. So I'm a big one for pushing for that in curriculum. And also for me, I try and focus on creating opportunities specifically with regards to employment. And so when I say that, if I think about red carpet, green dress, this isn't employment in the same way, but I just want to give the example. Red carpet, green dress, our global design competition, one of the things I try and focus on is when we put the word out about this particular competition, I try and make sure that we put that kind of news out to so many different platforms where they'll have to translate the press release, you know, like across West Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Egypt. We want it to go to Japan. We want it to go to Malaysia, because we want to open up the opportunities for people from different communities to be involved in that conversation. And I think part of the way that the sustainable fashion space has become so I don't know how else to say it, lacking representation and inclusion, is because we don't allow, there's not a kind of creation of space for people who don't fit a specific mold. That door is not open for the jobs, it's not open for the meetings, it's not open for the decision making, it's not open for the boardroom. And so it just creates a really narrow view of the world, which I think, who wants that? Who wants to be in a space where all they hear is the view of one demographic? And I struggle with it so much. I can't even articulate how much it bothers me, and how I'm so trying to, in everything I do, kind of challenge that and create opportunities and make people see things differently. Even with red carpet, green dress at the Oscars, it's like, yeah, okay, so I'm a Black woman, and I started this campaign with Susie as a contest winner. And I worked from being the contest winner. Then I was pulled on board as the campaign director, and then I became the global campaign director, and then I became the vice president, and then I became the CEO over a period of like 8-9 years, right? And working my way through that, and having quite a fortunate structure where I worked with somebody that was rewarding me for what I was doing and creating those opportunities. But I know that my experience is so rare. You have so many moments where Black people, and I know it's Black people, but where Black people are doing the work, but they aren't getting the accolades, they aren't getting the promotions or the job titles that reflect the work that they're doing. And they're working in spaces where they don't even have someone to talk to about the kind of exclusion that they're feeling. Like they don't have that kind of HR support, which I think should be even separate from almost, I think there's HR and then there's almost that kind of representation and inclusion officer or person that has a completely different set of skills to HR, but they don't have anywhere to go to talk about those moments where there was like a passive aggressive racist comment, or where somebody asked them, expected that they should know this thing because it was a Black question. So there's lots of different ways that it affects me, but I'm trying to, in everything I do, just challenge people and support the organizations that are creating space for Black people. The last thing I'll say is we worked with a really great, last year, when everyone discovered that racism existed apart from Black people, we worked with an organization, well, it was a kind of an organization and collective called The Root, and they did this incredible 6-part podcast series talking about kind of decolonizing the fashion industry. So what I try and do is support those kind of initiatives, sponsoring them, amplifying their voices, etc. And then with my work, just pull more people in from the Black community and from other communities and say, yeah, you should be listening to them, because this conversation has been dominated by the same group for too long. I'm so sorry that wasn't a short answer, but this is something that just really upsets me. And I sometimes feel quite helpless, but then I sometimes think, no, there's something I can do. So I'm always struggling with it, to be honest.
I think that was perfectly well said. And I definitely appreciate and hear you saying that there's only so much that you can do. And I think rather than trying to take on the burden, just think about what interactions are applicable to you that also coexist with what you're doing as well. So I think that is definitely commendable. And I'm totally, this whole conversation is making me rethink about not just sustainability, but also how I show up as well as a Black woman. So thank you.
And you know, the thing that you said then about showing up as a Black woman, the thing that I think we keep like forgetting in the sustainable fashion conversation is Black women have for a long time pioneered sustainability. For so long. I mean, one of my first role models was Professor Wangari Maathai, who founded the Green Belt movement, you know, and now there's all this conversation about carbon sequestration and carbon capture. And it's like, this woman was doing this in like the 80s, right? And so it's almost also about pushing up and elevating kind of role models and leaders and people who've been pioneering and giving them like more visible platforms and celebrating them the same way we celebrate. And this isn't actually a dig, this is actually just a kind of, why can't we celebrate, like, and she's passed away now, may she rest in peace, but why can't we celebrate these leaders the same way we celebrate the David Attenboroughs and the Jane Goodalls and all these other amazing people who are doing great things to push the message of sustainability? Why can't we show that same level of adoration and celebration for Black people or people from BIPOC communities when they're doing the exact same thing, you know? So yeah, I love that you said show up, because yeah, I kind of love that phrase, but that's another thing we need to do as an industry, show up for the people that have been doing the work, you know?
100%. I mean, I could talk to you so much about this.
Same,
but,
same here. It's part one. Should we do part two?
Oh my gosh, do not throw that at us because we will snap that up.
I would so happily do a part two, honestly.
One of the things we wanted to talk to you about is get your view around sustainability and the accessibility of it for people who may be on a lower income. And hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn. I think sometimes sustainability can be seen as quite elitist in the fact that it's expensive, which makes sense in terms of production. So do you have any thoughts around that, or how people can still be sustainable if they can't necessarily have the price tag to match it?
Yeah, no, I love this question. And actually, I do have thoughts on it. And I think what I try and do, I break it down into, okay, on one hand, we've got the idea of sustainability being that it's not fast fashion. So not fast fashion is like not the high street, not the kind of H&M's, Topshops of the world, right? And I understand why that isn't sustainability, because of the business model, because we're overproducing, because they're, you know, in some cases, they're literally burning more than they sell. So that's insane. That's totally not sustainable. But on the other hand, within those price ranges, and for people that still want to look fashionable, because I think with sustainability and this whole accessibility thing, we keep removing the joy of fashion, the joy of getting something that we've fallen in love with, the joy of the art of fashion, and the fact that people love fashion for a reason. We love clothes because of how they make us feel. We want to look good. And I think that's a massive area where I think sustainability hasn't nailed it. They haven't delivered an alternative or enough alternatives to those kind of H&M, Topshops, which deliver kind of, I would say, trend-driven clothing, yes, but that's nice, that's price accessible. And that is where sustainability needs to step up a bit more and provide those solutions. Because right now, you're either saying to people who are shopping in those places, you're not being sustainable, but actually, if they're buying from those particular brands and they're looking after those items, and they're like treating them well and they're kind of caring for them well, then they are actually treating those items sustainably. And those items are still made by somebody. It's when you get to those spaces where you've got really low cost items that are made to fall apart. That's what annoys me, because sustainability needs to create more accessibly priced clothing that's well made. to kind of challenge this other side of it where it's excessively priced, but it's like crap, it falls apart, so you have to buy it again in 2 weeks. So I don't have any issues with people who are buying what they can afford. I just say, buy what you can afford, but look after it, wash it the way that it's supposed to be washed, air dry it, turn it inside out, wash it on a cooler temperature, reduce that greenhouse gas or that kind of environmental footprint. Do the things you can do with what you can afford. Sustainable fashion, step up and provide those solutions for people, because the other thing people will say is, you've got resale platforms, like, so you can do thrifting, resale platforms like Depop, etc., which I absolutely love. And I think it's important that that is celebrated as a form of sustainability. And I think that we all know that when it was being done before by certain communities, it wasn't even called thrifting. It was literally called secondhand, right? And it was kind of shamed a little bit, and it was kind of looked down upon. When we'd wear hand-me-downs, it was ridiculed. But now it's like this hot topic. And so what's happening with thrifting is it's becoming gentrified. So in spaces, people that would be able to pop to thrift shops and buy what they wanted for their family, and it's affordable and it's still kind of nice stuff, all the good stuff's getting taken away. It's getting sold on resale apps like these platforms, and it's kind of excluding people that do that because that's how they facilitate their fashion needs. So thrifting is great, but we have to do it in a way that's like respectful of community. So I love thrifting, and it is, you can find something for your price point. The other thing for me about this accessibility thing with sustainable fashion is, I do think sometimes people say, I can't afford sustainable fashion. And on average, it's 30 to 40% more expensive, roughly, right? This isn't a law, but roughly, because of the cost of the inputs being more, you're paying more for the certifications, for the transparency, for the clean processes, for paying workers and artisans and stuff well. But on the other hand, I also think when you go shopping on the high street, you'll say to me, you can't afford sustainable fashion, and I'm not calling anybody out, but then you'll go to the high street and you will buy 15, you'll walk out with 6 bags, and you'll do impulse buys at the counter. So you'll like throw in those things. It's like, oh, 3 for 5, 2 for 10, 6 for 15. So you'll basically spend like 40, 50 pounds on impulse buys that you don't really need, and you didn't even think you needed till you got to the counter, but you won't spend that money on a sustainable piece. And I think that kind of gets to me a bit, because people should understand that if you buy sustainable offerings within stores, that data signals to the brand that they should make more of that, that is an area of interest to the consumers. So even if you're in a fast fashion brand and you see that capsule sustainable line, I always say buy it, because I think these brands need to see that there is a consumer interest in sustainability as well.
That makes complete sense. And I think yeah, it does. And I think
it did in my head.
I really loved it when you were saying that afford what you can afford, but also think about how we wash, think about how we care for our clothes, because you can have a piece of item from the high street that you can have for like 2 or 3 years. So,
totally.
And just being more, I guess, conscious of what we're purchasing and why we're purchasing. I think in general society there's a shift happening, so that makes complete sense. And I think it ties into like the next question I have about 80-20. I don't want to say much about it, but Chanel and I have like seen you talk about this, so we want to explain 80-20 to our community, please.
Absolutely. So I came up with my 80-20 rule because I started to just feel like in the sustainable fashion space, there is this kind of illusion that you can be perfect, right? Where that sometimes it can come across as a bit worthy, a little bit judgmental, a bit kind of, this is the best way to be a good person. And I just think that there's so many problems with that way of thinking and that statement. And so instead of it, I wanted to kind of come up with something that was a bit kinder to myself and encourage people to be kinder to themselves. So instead of saying, this is how you can be perfect, it's acknowledging that we cannot be perfect in this space. Because even if you do this one thing or this thing that you think is like this fantastic solution, there'll be another side to that could be a negative impact for somebody else. You could find a brand and you're like, I want all my friends to shop this brand. It's amazing. It does all of these amazing things, but hey, they don't go to the size ranges that include all of your friends. So even whatever you find, there's a way that it won't quite meet it. So what I did is I said, I'm going to do my absolute best in all the different ways that I can be. So I'm going to be really careful with what I buy, how often I buy, looking at the label. If it says dry clean only, do I want to get that? Those kind of things. Just be so focused on the bits that I can change, you know, and even in my life cycle as well, like, am I going to go do the bike ride instead of driving? Have I got my reusable water? Am I looking on the inside of this garment before I buy it to make sure that that stitching is good? Like, these are the things I'm going to do. And that's my 80. And I started my sustainable journey at, like, I don't think anyone starts a sustainable journey at 0, because there are things that you did in your household when you were growing up that are inherently sustainable that you never used this word for, like using the Tupperware for leftover food, tying the plastic bags in knots and putting them under the sink and using them again and again and again, fixing holes, fixing buttons, you know, mending, darning. Like, people have done these things, knitting. So I think everyone starts somewhere above 0, and we journey towards our kind of 80, where we're doing our absolute best that we can do. But the 20 that's missing is that thing that we will never get. And I think 80-20 is about making peace with the fact that you do the best that you can do. And honestly, everybody try and just do the best that they can do, and not judging each other, but just sharing information and saying, this helped for me, you could try this, but understanding people are coming from different spaces of even understanding things. And then that 20% is that thing that we're never going to get right, you know, and because you can't please everyone, you can't please every society, you can't please every community. And it's making peace with the fact, you know, that I'm going to live in my 0 to 80, and I'm going to do my best. And that 20%, I'm okay for it to just be there. Because I think that allows us to have joy in what we're doing. If you always think you can get to 100, you're not even enjoying the things that you're doing. You know, you're always looking and going, oh, I could do this better. And I think it's just an unhealthy way to approach sustainability, like, period. So that's the rule. That's the 80-20 rule. And take it, apply it, do with it what you will.
Do you know, I absolutely love it, because I feel like, talking to you, I've been on a journey, and I was like, I need to rethink about how I'm living and purchasing. But also, like you said, there are times where we have certain practices that are being sustainable. But I love the idea that with anything in life, you're never going to be 100% great at something. So let's just do the best that we can do. So love it. Thank you so much.
So with the awards season in full swing and the Oscars coming up, could you tell us a bit about your partnership with the Academy and how that works?
Sure. So Red Carpet Green Dress started as Susie Amos Cameron going to the Oscars with her husband James Cameron when he was nominated for Avatar. So that relationship is such a long-standing relationship, and she basically just didn't want to be on the red carpet being asked, oh, what are you wearing, and have nothing else to say but just like give the name of a brand. And she is passionate about sustainability, she's passionate about the environment, and so she said it would be so great if we could do a design competition and kind of challenge designers to create a sustainable piece, and then I will we'll work with them, get that piece made, and then I'll wear it to the Oscars, and then when I'm asked about it, I can talk about this piece, how it was made sustainably, and so make the answer sustainable. And so that's how we began. And since then, we work with different fashion brands. We work with big established brands. We work with small independent brands. And it's all focused on collaborating with them to show the many different sides of sustainable fashion. We've created sustainable moments which are vintage, which are upcycled, downcycled, recycled, which are focusing on artisans, which have used natural dyes, which have focused on cellulose-based circular materials. So showing that sustainability from a design lens specifically is all of these different things. And these are different ways that the fashion industry can adopt different practices to push sustainability. And it's been fantastic because we've worked with great talent, like amazing people like Naomi Harris, Laura Harrier. We worked with Lakeith Stanfield, who's nominated this year for Judas and the Black Messiah. But we've worked with people like Priyanka Bose and Danielle McDonald, Emma Roberts. So that was kind of what when we were talking before about representation and inclusion, when I choose the talent, I try and focus as much as I can on talent that represents different communities. So we've had talent from like the USA, from Ghana, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Brazil, Australia. And it's really, really important to me that we do that. So it's a really exciting project. It is red carpet season now. And I think it's just a different season, and it's quite stressful for so many people because red carpets are evolving. People are trying to figure out how will it look, how will it work. And so there is an element of, I think, stress associated with this new kind of red carpet experience. But for us, this is one of the most important years to have a sustainable message on that red carpet, because last year we went through a pandemic, which is 100% linked to how we're treating nature. And then we went through a race pandemic, which is 100% linked to how we're treating BIPOC people, specifically the Black community. That's how that began. And now that's triggered into what's happening in the Asian community. So this is an important year to talk about how we're making things and how we're respecting communities, and how important it is to recognize like the dignity that people have and should be afforded. So I'm really excited. I'm a tiny bit stressed, but you know, it will all come together and it will be fine.
It's amazing. Yeah, I can imagine it's quite stressful, but very exciting. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
I would definitely be up for part 2. In fact, there's something we're doing in May, and it would be so great to speak to you guys about it. I can't say about it now, but I think it would be so good to have a conversation with you about it. Generally speaking, it's about kind of a global sustainability, and I just think we would have a great conversation with it. And maybe that could be a conversation too, because I'd actually love to know more about you guys.
Okay.
Yeah, I would love to know more about you both.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so curious to just know what you're doing and what you're working on. So maybe we can make it like a conversation where we're talking about like what you're doing and what I'm doing. Maybe I'll have some questions of my own.
Let's do that.
I'll have some questions of my own.
You're giving us a girl crush right now, so.
Ditto.